started with prayer requests and praises, all that good stuff. So Mr. Abadusky has pictures. Now, he doesn't like it when I call him Mr. He says that's his dad. But Grandpa back there has pictures of number 10. So, yeah, number 10 was born last Sunday afternoon, and I saw Rick at a restaurant close to where he works, and first thing he did was whip out his phone and show pictures of the baby. So if you want to see pictures of the baby, definitely see them. Gary has a job. Gary Yoho has a job. That's praise. And are you enjoying it so far? Oh, wow. Isn't it interesting that we put that together? It's the easiest job I've ever had, and I love it. So apparently we like easy jobs. But I'm thinking you get to meet some pretty interesting people. Oh, very good. Very good. Good to have you here today. So what's, you want to introduce? Kelly? Okay, Kelly, good to meet you. And let's see, what else? So as far as announcements are concerned, the next 2 Sundays we'll have only one service at 10:45. There's no Bible study. There's also no Thursday Bible studies until after the first of the year. So we're getting ready for Christmas. We do have our candlelight service at 6:30 on Christmas Eve. So show up for that, and we'll just kind of put a nice little bow on this thing called Christmas this year. Laszlo is showing off a new hairdo. I'm thinking he's just bragging in a room full of bald men. He's bragging he's got a head full of hair. Yeah, and let's see. Last week I asked for prayer for the Donato family. Jacob, their son, is a preacher. I said Iowa. Dad's in Iowa. Son was ministering in a small church in Missouri. Left behind 4 children and a wife, but he passed away last Sunday afternoon from COVID. So be in prayer for that family. Frank is understandably just struggling. He says our Christmas won't be the same as yours, but be in prayer for us in the midst of it. So pray for the Donatos. What else? Yes, Mr. Abadusky. Again. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Jonathan, you had your hand up? Miss Debbie, recovering from surgery. Ovarian, one of the cancers, one of the female cancers. Yeah. Okay. Be in prayer for her. Scott Hollis' sister underwent emergency surgery and everything went well, so we put that report out. What else? What other prayer requests, praises? Nothing? Wow. Okay, who wants to open us with a word of prayer? Okay, Wes. Amen. Okay, go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 12. This is the last Bible study of the year, so we're going to wrap this study up, start something new after the first of the year. Luke chapter 12, starting at verse 13. So I'll read the whole thing. Won't stop for comment because we did that last week. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, drink, and be merry." But God said to the man, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God." So, what do you think the rich man is dealing with? What do you think he personally is dealing with in the parable? Money and goods are really important to him. How many agree? Is there something else that might be going on? Yes. Yes. Let's throw another component in there, though. Could worry be part of his problem? How is worry or just, yes, Aja. Yeah. How many of you have actually grown up on a farm or know a farmer or spent a lot of time with farmers? Okay, what's a farmer has a great crop this year. I'm going to ask Denny because he's good at shooting at the hip. So a farmer has a great year. What are you likely to hear from the farmer? What's the most common thing farmers say about a great year? Yeah, it never happens. Yeah, normally it's a yeah, but, right? Well, Jesus does paint this picture really so that the rich guy is on the losing end of the picture, right? He's number one, he's rich already, but then he has a really good year. And if you've hung around farmers and Gary grew up on a farm. If you've hung around farmers, if they have a really good year, they're most likely to say, yeah, but next year's likely to be bad. Almost always, right? And you said it a different way, and it's maybe 1 year out of 5, 6, or 8, that you just have a good year. So his thinking, if you take and look at his thinking, he's got an overabundance of crops. His concern is, what am I going to do with everything I've got? So let me build bigger. Is that based on worry? Is he hedging a bet? What's he doing? He's being selfish. How is he being selfish? Right. But we're not getting there yet. So let's not jump ahead. We want to paint the picture first. Right. Yeah. So let's just stop right there. So here's this man. He's concerned about the future. He's already rich, which he's painted. The picture Jesus paints is he's kind of, we're doing just exactly what Denny was talking about. He's a rich guy. What do you need more for? I love you've got 3 freezers full of beef and you want to buy 2 more. What do you want to do that for? But the text tells us what his thinking is. Right. Well, we still have to get to the be rich towards God. But so let's go through this as if we're living that story, that the story is really about us. Because remember, this all started with a question from the crowd. And the question from the crowd was a guy who was struggling with his brother. There's an inheritance, and he wants Jesus to be the arbiter. He wants him to make his brother do what he's supposed to do and give goods. Now Jesus is talking about goods. And this guy just doesn't seem to be getting it, does he? He's rich already. He's got this huge crop. Now he's going to tear down everything. He's going to build bigger. And he says, literally, hey, I can coast a little bit now. Do you know anybody that really does that? How many people coast in your life? I think the newer generation is trying to do it. I have noticed that the younger generation are starting to do things like they want to retire early and then work later on in life, which does make more sense. I had my best friend growing up had that mentality. He says, you ought to do your retirement years when you can enjoy them and then just work the rest of your life. But we don't do that. We have a tendency, if we've got a ton, what do we want to do? We want a ton more. Does he look like he's one of those people who wants a ton more? Yeah, go ahead, Edge. Does his story really sound foreign to us? How many of us have we have kind of an extra. We get a bonus, and we kind of, well, we want to do something with the bonus. We might fix up the house or do something like that. Can everybody relate? You know, and we kind of do those things. I'll give you an example, real life, and it's one I struggle with. And it's right after we moved here, that's when we discovered how many tornadoes come through, and power goes off. Now, in Montana, I had transported a generator from Central Florida all the way out to Montana, and we never used the generator in Montana. They're really good at burying their power cables, so you don't have to worry about ice bringing down the lines and all that stuff. And we didn't have that many power outages. So after a few years up there, I sold the generator that I had and never saw fit. I never cranked it up other than to run gas through it and, you know, make sure the engine was okay. I get here, and all of a sudden, I'm thinking, well, man, these people, they've all got generators. So I priced one of those whole house generators. I talked myself out of it almost immediately. Yeah, you know, what, $10,000 or something like that. And I see the wisdom for it in that, you know, you go without power, but the most I've ever been without power is hours, not like days or weeks. And then you have something like the tornadoes that happened this past week, particularly in Memphis. Oh, by the way, I did not let you know, another minister friend of mine put a little 14-year-old boy in Memphis on his prayer chain. And they were struck without power. And he had an asthma attack, went into the hospital, never recovered. So I just got word yesterday or day before yesterday that little boy had passed, a little 14-year-old. So be in prayer for that family. So you take and you look at places like where this tornado went, and some of those folks are looking at being without power for weeks, you know, days. Kind of makes sense to spend $10,000 on a generator, doesn't it? That runs on propane. It does kind of make sense. Is that like the rich man? What's our number one reason for having that power? Yeah, well, right now we heat the house, right? Especially here. What else? But what if you have a gas fireplace? Can you move into the living room and sleep in the living room? Yeah. Yeah, and what about, see, here's where my thinking goes. Because deep down, I've got a cheap bone that goes really, really deep. And so I look at $10,000 for a generator, and I talk myself out of it because I kind of think where that $10,000 could go elsewhere, you know, that sort of thing. And what are we trying to save? We're trying to save the food in the freezer, right? How much of that is there? And what's wrong with going to the store every day and buying groceries every day? What's wrong with that? Yeah. Yeah, but still. Yeah, but you're feeding 6. We're feeding 3. So there's a big difference. Food, the heat, you could make do. And again, I take and I look, yeah, but the most I've ever been without power is 6 hours or 8 hours. Yeah, well, you have to, I haven't hit the big storm yet. Yes. Yes, part of that is comfortable because we talk about those whole house generators, and it's not just for the refrigerator and the stove and things like that. It's everything. I want my air conditioner to continue. I want my heater to continue. You know, we do want a little bit of that comfort. But I'm still one of those. I go back and I say, man, if this happened 150 years ago to our ancestors, they would do what? They'd survive. They'd figure out some way. They'd go build a fire in the fireplace and, you know, that sort of thing. It's just kind of crazy. Are we like the rich man? More ways than we want to admit. And so that's what's important about looking at this story. Because remember, this parable is to teach a lesson. And the guy in the crowd started it all, and he's really concerned about the future. He wants his inheritance. And for whatever reason, maybe Jesus knew what was going on in the man's heart. Maybe, since he did it so often, I'm thinking likely. So he tells this story, and he paints the rich man in this picture that is all too close for comfort, isn't it? Because we do a lot of that same sort of thing at different points in our lives. But now let's wrap it up. Let's try and pull it all together. Verse 20. But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" Is that a question directed towards the man who started this with a question? So think about that. Verse 21. This is how it will be with anyone who serves up things for himself, but is not rich toward God. Now, we already touched on this a little bit with some of the comments, and it was, yeah, but what could you do with that crop? What are some of the things you could do with that crop? Yes, Wes. Feed the hungry. Did I hear you tell a piano story this morning? Was that this morning that I heard the piano stories for $5? That was you. Tell the story. And by the way, just look at that man. He's moved a lot of pianos because he would then take the piano, put it on his trailer, and haul it off to their house. So you might have sold it for $5, but you probably spent more money just delivering the piano to him, right? Yeah, that's pretty cool. So, and that's pianos. What about crops like wheat? What can you do with crops like wheat? Makes a lot of flour. What else? Could you feed a lot of poor? Yeah. Could you? How does he go from being selfish to rising to the occasion of what Jesus teaches in this, and it's be rich towards God? What does that mean, to be rich toward God? How could this man have been rich toward God? Rather than build those storehouses, how could that rich man have been rich toward God? Feed the poor and the widows. What else? Well, no. Doesn't record that. Yeah. Doesn't thank God for the harvest. So is that enough with God, just to thank God? What do you think Jesus is trying to get at about being rich toward God? Well, thankful. Yeah. Prayerful. Yes, Jonathan. Yeah. How is he not rich toward God? He did. Look at verse 20 again. I asked you a question, but verse 20 is important. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And does Does this go back to the young man who started all this with a question? Yes, Jonathan. Are you saying yes? So it does go back to him. How? I think Edge is, or he was stretching. Yeah, is it just greed or is it worry too? Yeah? Yeah, Edge? Mm-hmm. I love serving in Montana, mostly because it's just Montana and it's pretty. But serving in Montana was particularly hard. It was hard to be evangelical in Montana. The majority of Montanans claim no religious affiliation at all. Everybody's convinced how they've got a really high education rate. There's more college graduates in Montana than there is in most of the rest of the country, except maybe New England. But which is also interesting because the agnostic atheist percentage is the same in Montana and Wyoming as it is in New England. So high education, they go to send your kids to university, and guess what they teach you? Not to believe in God. So that's what happens. But the real big issue was getting across points like what Jesus is trying to get across, and what Edge just very well articulated. It all belongs to God. The problem for Montanans is you go out there and there are families that have lived on the same land for 125, 150 years. Same family, just passes from one generation to the next. And they remember when it was really tough. Remember what I talked about with the generator and all that stuff? They remember what it was like to live in a log cabin. They might even have that log cabin on their property, and they can say, yeah, great-grandpa built that. And grandma was born in that. You know, those sort of stories. But tiny little log homes. You've got gaps between the logs, and it's filled with mud, and it's a windy place in Montana and dry, so it wouldn't take long for the mud to dry out and then for the wind to blow it through. And all of a sudden you got wind whistling through your wall. You'd have this tough winter. We just got notice after Lily arrived. Oh, praise, Lily's in South Florida. But after Lily arrived, we got a praise because the western part of Montana got hit with a massive snowstorm. So she just barely made it out in time. But you know, you've got snowstorms, and all you've got is a horse or a horse and wagon that's sitting out in the backyard, and town is 15 miles away, and that's where, other than the groceries you grow, that's where you get some of your basics. And they had to do it. What would it be like to hitch up a wagon with a mule and head into town just to get some flour and beans and stuff like that? What would that be like, Jim? You wouldn't want to do it. Why wouldn't you want to do it? Well, it's not like our conveniences. We're the generation that wants to get a whole house generator and have everything set up so that if the power goes out, man, we still can turn on the air conditioner, right? Well, they didn't grow up like that. They still remember. You talk to a rancher in Montana, and I've got several friends. Some calve in January, February. Some calve as late as March or April. What's the difference between calving in Montana in January versus April? Well, yeah, actually you still have snow in April and it's still cold, but it is more like 30 degrees as opposed to 30 below zero. Now, a newborn calf is born, and it's January, what do you have to do, Denny? Keep it warm. Well, I should ask Dairy Farm Boy. So Dairy Farm Boy will know that calf comes in the middle of winter, and a lot of times it's a heifer, and she's never delivered before. That's why she's called a heifer. So you pull that calf out, and immediately into this 30 below zero weather, what happens to a newborn calf at 30 below zero? Ears freeze, nose freeze, all those things. You got to keep them warm. I've actually been in a rancher's house, and the calves were in their laundry room, and yeah, it was kind of interesting. They managed to escape into the kitchen once in a while. So that's what it means to be a rancher's wife. Now, I say all of that because the reason they were so tough to evangelize is it's hard for someone who grows up and lives in that sort of model to not come to the conclusion, I did this. I survived. It was my hard work. I made this happen. And it's really, really hard for them to then say, God was the one who was behind it. So evangelism in that sort of culture is really tough. How much like them are we? What's that? More and more. We get more and more, man, I kind of did this. You know, I did the work. You know, it's you know, that basic that we take and we look at our fruits and you know, come to the conclusion, it's easy for a long-term churchgoer to take and look at themselves and look how righteous they are and look at others and just look how unrighteous they are. So it's easy for you to be a Pharisee because you're doing comparison. For somebody who's really worked hard, it's really easy for you to come up with a conclusion. I did this. I did that. As a preacher, when a church grows, it's really easy for preachers to take and look at the growth of the church, and guess what they say? I did this. But what Jesus is saying is quite different. It's exactly what Edge was going to, and this is completely different because it all comes from God. How does it all come from God? Everything. How do we have no credit for really what we do? Yeah, Jonathan. He does. And what else? Well, you're not even in the position that you get in without him in some way having influence in your life. Your talents, your abilities, all those things come from where? God. Do we struggle with that idea too? Yeah. For parents of these little ones here, I had something interesting happen last night. So last night, later on at night, Lily's been picked up from the airport. They're back home. And so I text my daughter and Lily and Suzanne all at the same time. I said, you ready to send her back? And she says, no, why would I want her to go back? I want her to stay. And I said, well, I'm just trying to get your leftovers. So I'm still not at the good part yet. So I'm just trying to get your leftovers. It's like, oh, wow, this college kid is just so full of herself, that sort of thing. She says, no, you can have Ken. He's the middle one. It's always the middle child. Middle child is the worst. Worst. She said, she paraphrased a quote from Star Wars. The attitude is strong in that one. How many of you have a teenager where the attitude is strong in that one? Oh, yeah. The parents are, yeah. So we have that sort of attitude, don't we? We look at others and we just kind of come to the conclusion there's a whole lot of problems with them. And here's this rich guy who takes and looks at a really good crop. And if we know farmers and we're really honest about farmers, man, that was just one of many years before you got the really good one. And it might be the only time you ever see that sort of crop. But he didn't ever come to the conclusion, this is from God. And so Jesus goes right to the very heart of it. And he deals with it. And he talks about our greed, but also our insecurities. Now, back to the guy who started it all. How did this have anything to do with a guy who is the younger son, and all he's looking for is his part of the inheritance? How does he relate to this lesson? Yeah, what happens when you change your attitude about anything that you get? What happens when you're happy with whatever you get? Because who's delivering it? What's that? Yeah. Not getting anything. What would happen if his... Which is what I said last week. There's only really one lesson here. But how does it relate to this man? And if you remember, that was part of the lesson last week. So what does this have to do with this man? What happens in your life if you are content with anything God throws your way? What happens to life? Which is, you take and you look at the story and you see how easy it is for us to get there. Is there anything wrong, as you were looking at, possibly losing your job at the first of the year, was there anything wrong with you prepping for that possibility? But what's the but in that? No. I'm putting the but in for you. The but is this. You would have been happy no matter which way God took this. You said it, I'm kind of paraphrasing what you said, but would have been happy with anything that God threw our way. Have you faced that really in life? Do you have your hands up, Edge? So here's this parable, and I love what Jeff had to say about the nature of parables. Normally, and I've said it before, normally there's one big point to a parable. And we just, sometimes we overanalyze every little aspect of the parable. One of the famous ones is the prodigal son. I've heard sermons where they talk about what the ring means and what the sandals mean and all that stuff. But, here's the big but. When it gets down to it, this parable was in response to that young man who's asking for help with his inheritance. And the parable does have one big point, but it goes very central to us as human beings. And it went to him and his particular challenges in honoring God. When we read these stories, it ought to do the same for us. Studying the Bible ought to be one of those life-transforming moments, because at any moment that we read stories like this, we might find ourselves just a little too close to that young man who had started it with asking a question. See, this parable was meant to change his life. And when we study these words from Jesus, it's meant to change our life. Because, why? We are human, and it's so very easy for us to, well, it's so easy for us to actually have those weaknesses, but not realize we have those weaknesses. That's why I was talking about the Pharisees who could look at everybody else and thought there was something wrong with them and never see what was wrong with them, right? Do we do that? It's really easy for us to be super righteous and say, and even name other people, how, well, they don't have my spiritual maturity. Really? Doesn't that knock you out of the league just by saying that you've got this super spiritual maturity? Yes, Mona. There is a thin line. How thin? Ah. Yeah. How many times, you remember the old wisdom that we were given, that when you point a finger, there's 3 more pointing back at you, right? How many times have you heard that? How many times have you really stopped and you're pointing a finger and then it suddenly dawns on you, wait, 3 fingers are pointing back towards me? Can you relate? It's that moment that we take and read stories like this. Those are the sort of moments. It's like, well, God, maybe buying a whole house generator, how close am I to being like this parable, being like this young man? Does it even make me like this young man? Or am I being like Jeff is talking? I thank you for this story, because here I am as your preacher, and I'm watching what you guys are dealing with, praying for you. But man, other than them saying it, how many of you knew that they were even dealing with that sort of struggle? That they could, and it's still not over with, right? It could change any time. Yeah. Well, which is what I was saying at the beginning, but because truly I didn't think this was going to go that far. So here they are, they're struggling, and it was the possibility that he was going to have to look for a different job that didn't have this requirement. Oh! Wow. Yeah. When he turns 60, I want a party for him. Yeah. I believe me, for anybody who's been in that position in life, you're just you're going through it. When we started looking for a new ministry, one of the things that was making me think was, I was in my 50s at the time. Same sort of, and I'm thinking, man, 60-year-old preacher, who's going to want a 60-year-old preacher? Come to find out, churches are so desperately hungry for preachers, it'll take anybody. So 60 didn't mean anything. What a challenge, though. And you've got 4 kids and a wife to support, and he is the sole breadwinner. Sole breadwinner, and you're looking at this big change in life, and it might possibly mean a big cut in pay. And yet, what I heard consistently from these two was, God's in control. God's going to take care of us. I love that sort of maturity. You know, I'm glad you married somebody mature, Jeff. Yeah, Mona. Mhm. We, for the first time since we've been married, we are looking at a different Christmas. We've never, ever been just the two of us at Christmas, ever. And this is the first Christmas that we're doing it. And don't feel bad for us. We see family on Tuesday, so we have an early Christmas with them. We see family after Christmas, so we have Christmas with them. It's just not on Christmas Day. So for the first time in history, we ordered a meal from Cracker Barrel. We'll pick it up on Thursday. We'll have a meal, and then we'll go to the movies. Yeah, well, the movies is really easy for us. The problem is Hollywood's not putting out any good stuff. I'm not seeing anything good right now. So anyway, so that's our plan. Lo and behold, and this isn't to pat me on the back either, I'm at Dollar General, and I'm buying some stuff at Dollar General just around the corner from our place. And there's this cute little girl. She's so excited. She's in her own apartment. And 21 years old. I said, really? And I'm thinking, I'm a stranger. You ought not to be saying things like this to strangers. You know, there's some creepers out there. But and it helps. It really does help. She's just adorable. Just this cute little thing. And she's talking about being by herself. And I said, really, by yourself? All by yourself? What are you going to do for Christmas? All with the intent. And I don't, when it's a cute little girl, it doesn't take much for me to think, why don't you come over to our house for Christmas? We'll have Christmas with you. Thankfully, she was having Christmas with family. But you do kind of think differently. You do think, man, this person whom I don't even know, they might be one of those people that just need somebody to love on them, and we can share our excess. I mean, it's a Cracker Barrel meal. We'll have plenty to feed. Right? And so, think about that poor 21-year-old little girl who, first of all, doesn't need to be telling strangers that she's by herself. But what a story. 21, single, in her first apartment by herself, and she's looking at Christmas. How many people around us are like that? And if you don't ask the questions, you don't know what the real story is. Any other comments? Because folks are starting to come in. Father, we just want to thank you for this day. We praise you. We just pray as we look at this story that it is a parable that if it doesn't change us, it at least challenges us. That, Father, we just fall in love with what you've done for us. We fall in love with everything that you've given us, you've bequeathed us, you've trusted us with for the stewardship that we've been given a responsibility for, all those things. But let us not lose sight of the fact that you want us to be your conduits of love, of sharing, of just helping others, just see the love of Jesus Christ. May we do that more often. In Jesus' name, amen.